Good evening. My name is Teresa Jacobs, and I'm a proud member of the Missoula League of Women Voters. And on behalf of the League and the Pi Sigma Alpha Honor Society here at the university, I welcome you and thank you all for coming. We also welcome those who are watching this live stream on MCAT. Who we elect to the offices of President and Vice President of the United States is an incredibly important matter. Ideally, the extensive process we use is something that the public can understand and trust, and that can result in each political party getting to the point of nominating someone who they think can win the race and who would be good for our nation. The League conceived of this event in early April to bring better understanding to the impact of political parties on the race for the presidency. We're looking at the primary outcomes through the national conventions and delegate votes to the nominations. So we're not going to be talking about Electoral College tonight. The League of Women Voters has a long history of holding public forums and of promoting civil discourse. We've already reviewed the ground rules with the audience, and we're going to be holding to the focus on topics and process tonight. We hope that you'll write down your questions and share them. In the last 30 to 40 minutes tonight, our moderator will be reading questions that are being submitted and reviewed in the back by the students and some of the League members for clarity and readability. So one last reminder to please turn off your cell phones if you haven't already. Tonight we are very fortunate to have this time together in this beautiful space here at the University of Montana. And we also have Peggy Kaur as our moderator tonight. Peggy serves as the Vice President of Integrated Communications, here at the University of Montana. She joined UM in 2007, serving as the Dean of the UM's School of Journalism. Previous to that, after a 25-year career in news media, she was a professor and the Knight Chair on the Press Leadership and Community at the University of Kansas. Peggy received her undergraduate degree in French and journalism here at the University of Montana. Thank you, Peggy.
All right, thank you. And again, good evening to all of you. We want to welcome all of you here, those of you who are here in the University Center Theater, and those of you who are watching this via live stream. And also, importantly, a thanks to our panelists who are here and our experts who are here and experts in the audience. We do have the leaders of the state's major political parties with us this evening. We have the chairman of the Montana Republican Party, Jeff Essman, and we have the executive director of the Montana Democratic Party, Nancy Keenan. We also have 4 other individuals whom I will introduce later, who have served in party leadership positions for many years and have attended their own party's national conventions as delegates. If there's one thing we can say about the presidential election process this year, it may be that there has been almost as much attention to the process, the way we elect our candidates as we go through this months-long process, as much attention to that, perhaps, as attention to the individual candidates themselves. Much of this can be confusing to those of us in the general public because there are procedural differences between the political parties, and there are differences in how the various states handle these processes as we get to the nominations. We're hearing about contested conventions, we're hearing about pledged delegates, unpledged delegates, superdelegates, rules committees. We're hearing about delegate counts versus the popular vote. We have caucuses we have primaries. We are seeing a spotlight on the party delegates who will be casting votes at the national party conventions in July and who will be determining our presidential nominees for the country. So here's how our evening proceeds. And I believe we're going to have, we may have an outline for all of us on the screen behind me. So as you know, we are addressing the impact of political parties on the race for the presidency. We'll move through a brief orientation about the process from the perspective of an elections official. Then we'll go to a short history lesson, and then we will turn to our panelists, our two party leaders, and the four delegates who will share their experiences and their expertise. As we approach around 8 p.m., so in about an hour, we will take a 10-minute break. And this will again give you the opportunity, if you have a question, to write it down on an index card and make sure to turn it in. Then after we reconvene, we will move to further questions. We'll have some opportunities again to hear from our elections and history experts here. And then we will turn to the questions from the audience for our panelists. So let's begin with the upcoming primary election that we have here in Montana on June 7th. As we all know, our state, Montana, is one of the few remaining states to have a primary. And we already know absentee ballots have already been sent out. The actual date again is Tuesday in just over 2 weeks. So at this point, I'm very pleased to introduce Rebecca Connors. Rebecca was appointed to the Missoula County's elections administrator in 2014 by the county commissioners. She is the person who oversees the elections process for this county. Rebecca and 4 staff members work in accordance with laws and regulations that have been established by our state and our federal governments, essentially to protect citizens' right to vote and to protect and assure the reliability of the results of the elections. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Slippery Rock University in Pennsylvania. So I'd ask Rebecca to please tell us about your work, especially as it relates to the upcoming primary election and how you handle the presidential contest differently from all the other races. Help us better understand your role in this entire process.
Thank you. Good evening. And if anybody knows, elections can be complex, so hopefully I can help you navigate through that complexity tonight. My work as Missoula County Elections Administrator mostly has to do with managing voter information, preparing and conducting elections, ballot layout, and so much more. Our major elections this year are the June 7th primary and the November 8th general election. And before I forget, it's not too late to register to vote. You just simply need to be 18 years or older, be a resident of the state 30 days or more, and be a U.S. citizen. We currently have late registration at the fairgrounds. If you go to our election center and you're a Missoula County resident, you can do the late registration process. Every 4 years, on even-numbered years, the ballots for the primary and the general elections include a presidential race. This is one of those years when our office sees the highest voter turnout because everybody loves voting for a president. But in presidential years, something else changes. As you know, races for congressional seats, governors, state, county, city positions are all decided by a majority vote. Successful candidates in the primary election advance to the November ballot, where all parties compete in the same race. But the presidential race is different from all of the rest. The parties use data resulting from our primary to determine who will be involved in the nomination process for president. These parties will speak tonight regarding how that process works when they meet this month and in July. But again, my office does it's a completely separate process than what the political parties do. The parties submit their nominees for the November ballot, and then I do my job to place them on the ballot. And to go a little bit further about political parties in Montana from a governmental perspective, there are 3 recognized parties in Montana: Democratic, Republican, and Libertarian. If enough candidates file statewide as Libertarian, it would trigger a primary. Even if they don't hold a primary, the party nominees will still appear on the November ballot for that race. Minor parties, such as the Reform Party, Constitutional Party, Green Party, must gather a percentage of signatures to appear on the ballot in November. Since they are not recognized as an official party, they do not participate in the primary process. The Secretary of State's office views an independent candidate as someone who does not affiliate with any party. A presidential candidate who wishes to run as an independent must also petition to be on the ballot. Part of my job is to make sure voters are prepared to vote and have a positive experience on Election Day. We hope to see very high turnout this year and beyond, and we have a new way to help voters check that they are registered, to see where their polling place location is, and to track their absentee ballot status. And this is all available through the My Voter Page, mt.com, My Voter Page, mt.com. And that's the link up there. When you vote in this primary on June 7th, you'll have to choose between two ballots. That is because Montana is one of 20 states that holds an open primary. Voters do not register a party when they register to vote in Montana. If you registered that information, it would be public information. So the century-old process ensures and protects voters' confidentiality by letting the voter privately choose the ballot they wish to vote. Another thing to note is that the names of some presidential candidates who have publicly dropped out of the presidential race will still be on your ballot. That is because the last day to file as a candidate in Montana, which is March 14th, is also the last day to withdraw your name from the ballot. This is why you'll see some dated information. Our primary is one of the later ones in the primary season, but voters should rest assured that their vote still remains important in this primary season. Each state is like a puzzle piece, and the puzzle is not complete without Montana's contribution. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I like the analogy of a puzzle. So when we try to understand how the electoral system and the political party systems work and how they can each affect the other during presidential election years, it's natural, I think, for the general public to wonder, have we always done it this way? And why is it set up this way? These are just the sorts of questions that our next guest and our next speaker is going to help us with. She could teach an entire course on this topic, so I consider it a bit of a heroic effort on her part to condense this down to about the next 10 minutes. Jennifer Copley earned a Master's of Education at the University of Montana, and she taught high school history and political science for more than 4 decades. She helped begin the advanced placement and the international baccalaureate programs here in Missoula. As a teacher, she placed the priority on advancing her own education, sometimes with travel over 25 summers attending courses and receiving scholarships from such organizations as the Fulbright Foundation and the National Geographic Alliance and others. She recently retired, and she remains involved in teacher education and community service. Jennifer, please give us your history of the political parties and their involvement in our presidential elections.
The real reason I'm here, the real reason I'm here is that all the history professors with PhDs are on vacation. So they went to the next level. But I love talking about government, and my job with you this evening is to really review Political Science 101, just to review, so that we're all on the same footing, so that we have, just to recall to memory some of the important things about political parties. Harry Truman said that if you want a friend in Washington, D.C., you better buy yourself a dog. And for people like you and me who really need to be represented, who have issues and causes that are important to us, we have to rely on political parties. And they have unfortunately gotten maybe an unfair rap in recent years. The press often demeans the importance of what they do. So we're going to look at that. Now, the press isn't alone. The major author of the Constitution, James Madison, warned about factions, the dangers of factions and parties. And George Washington's farewell address was not very optimistic about the importance of political parties. Okay, but nevertheless, those same framers created a federal system. And in that federal system, divided power between states and the national government. And we can see in Article 1 and in Article 2 that they have carefully divided control over elections between 50 states and the national government. 50 states with minds of their own and the national government. In addition, okay, they, a few years later, passed the First Amendment, and then in 1868, the 14th Amendment. Now, you can see that now we're adding to the problem of how complex elections are going to be, because now we're giving everybody freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and we're making the states follow the law that the national government has to follow. We're expanding the protections for involvement, and political parties are about involvement. Organized groups of people with at least roughly similar political aims and opinions that seek to influence public policy. They are, the Supreme Court has said again and again, private organizations who have the freedom to speak, the freedom to assemble, the freedom to represent their wishes for their constituents. When Freedom House identifies the countries around the world who are free, okay, they always look, does that country have competitive political parties? Okay, so we've always had a two-party system in the United States. You're seeing a little problem with the conversion from Mac to Android system here. It didn't work quite, it didn't balance quite. But we've always had a two-party system, whether that was the Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans, the Jacksonian Democrats versus the Whips, or the Democrats versus the Republicans of today. Third parties, however, have arisen throughout history, and they have challenged majority parties. They've encouraged those majority parties to reform, to change, to adapt, and we see that happening today. Okay, we see people on the ground saying, look, the third parties know the major parties aren't adapting enough to our needs, and we're seeing that same kind of pressure today. So we still retain a two-party system for some important structural reasons. But what we're focusing on today is the fact that Democrats and Republicans, for the most part, retain their positions of power in government. They're dominant, and they tend to write the rules to benefit themselves, right, to make it more difficult for third parties. So we have an incredibly complex system here, okay? But political parties are still critical, and we just want to walk through to review together what they do. They enable coalitions to express shared viewpoints. They allow groups to work towards shared goals. They recruit and they nominate like-minded candidates, or at least they try to. We've had a little difficulty with that this year. Okay? They rally support for candidates and for issues. They pressure elected officials to keep their promises. Another way of saying that is there are watchdogs. There are eyes and ears in Washington, D.C. Those of us sitting here who lack great power rely on parties to do so much. They are, say some sources, links between people and government. They're linkage groups. Okay? Well, historically, those political parties have also worked to democratize the system, to make you and I more readily able to influence what government does. So before the Civil War, both parties initiated national nominating conventions. And near the turn of the 20th century, state parties opened up party caucuses to members, and the Progressive Party initiated primary elections. So the process, the goal of parties has been little by little to democratize. Okay. So I'm also asked to review, just to give the overview of how does the presidential nominating system work. So we'll start with primaries and caucuses. Step one, just walk through the steps briefly. Okay. States originally began with caucuses. Those caucuses were originally politicians meeting in smoke-filled back rooms, is the cliche, deciding who got to run. My brother-in-law, okay, your dad. They decided in smoke-filled rooms. Parties worked very hard to open up those caucuses to party members, to ordinary people like you and me. Their meetings, they're usually at the precinct level. Participants are often asked to participate in discussions, to physically go to parts of the room where other supporters of a particular candidate may be standing or sitting, as in this Iowa case that you see in the picture, and parties pay the bill. Caucuses are decreasing because few people in today's world have the time to go and participate in this kind of an activity on an evening or a weekend afternoon. Most states have moved towards the primary system, and Rebecca's already mentioned those. Elections run and are paid for by state officials. It's an open primary, unaffiliated voters may vote. Okay, if it's an open primary, as Rebecca's described it, and closed primaries are for registered party members to participate. We all have family members who go and cancel each other out in primaries all over the country. Now, primaries and caucuses tend to be front-loaded. We've heard that word a lot in this election cycle. Okay, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, both parties now allow to go first. We've all heard about Super Tuesday on March 1st, but the parties try to orchestrate these elections, these primary elections and caucuses, starting with smaller states, building the drama, getting us involved, pulling out the weaker candidates, okay? And these campaigns then allow time. The goal is to try to have the decisions made so the parties have a little time to rebuild party unity before the party conventions in the summer, okay? Because they've been tearing each other down, as we've seen so well, okay? And they may weaken the voices of late voting states. Now, in the elections of 2012, Montana's election turned out to be pretty important, but usually the decisions are made by the time we get into the late spring. Okay. All right, now choosing delegates is this next step in the process, and that's complicated. And we're hoping to learn more detail. My job is just to give you the overview. The delegates can range in age from 93-year-old former Governor Babcock here, with his young 17-year-old constituent at the 2012 election. They can range in age broadly, and Montana's officials, like our former Governor Schweitzer here, have played a role, an important role, in national conventions. They've been delegates. So the Democrats have some special rules. Some of those rules came into being in 1968. Delegates have to be chosen in open election year forums, okay? They had to be chosen proportionately to the primary and caucus votes. In other words, they're bound to vote proportionately for the candidates, okay? And the delegates could only vote for candidates who won 15% of a state vote. Now, I'm gonna go over, John, I'm sorry, I'll go fast. You all remember this election or heard about it? It was a mortifying experience for the Democrats for that reason, right? And the Democrats had to come up with a strategy so that it wouldn't happen again. This is a political spectrum used by the press, okay? Voters tend to vote towards the middle, okay? So the Democrats wanted to set up a system that would help guide the Democratic nomination towards the center, so we wouldn't get someone who is perceived by voters as being too far to the left or too far to the right, thus the superdelegates. Okay. politicians, experienced Pauls, who know what it takes to get elected. Okay, so the Republicans also have instituted reforms in recent years. Okay, if you hold your election before March 16th, you have to distribute the delegates proportionately. They allow a great deal of state leeway in how delegates will be assigned after that point. And they have the famous Rule 40. Only candidates who win 8 states can be nominated. Okay, so both the Democrats and the Republicans, in an effort to be more fair, have modified their rules in recent years. Both parties reserve delegate slots for officials. Okay, so these are the Democratic numbers. The superdelegates making up about 15% of the vote. Here are the Republican numbers. Okay, so they have delegates who will vote for the candidates the state's voters choose, and then they have political operatives, office holders, party officials who go to convention to try to choose an electable candidate. Okay. And then national conventions. Very quickly, the national conventions have 5 main jobs they have to do. 1, they've got to adopt rules. They've got to decide who gets seated at that party meeting. They write a platform, they approve a VP, and they crown the victors. Okay, so it's quite a party, right? The Republicans will be meeting here at the Quicken Loan Center. Okay, they're going to be sending 2,472 delegates. Somebody has to come up with 1,237. The Democrats will be meeting here in Philadelphia at the Wells Fargo Center. It'll be a bigger party. Okay, lots more numbers. Okay. And the Libertarians, we won't forget, choose their delegates at convention, and they'll have about 1,047 in attendance in Orlando. Okay, so there's 4 problems that can arise, and that's the end of it. Okay, first of all, sometimes conventions are contested. That means that a decision is not reached on the first ballot. That hasn't happened since 1948 and 1952. Okay, the first ballot has decided for more than 50 years. Sometimes people worry about a brokered convention. Okay, what they mean is they fear that if there's not a decision on the first ballot, the party regulars, the powerful elite in the party, will retreat to their smoke-filled rooms and make a decision. Okay, but that's speculation. And again, everything's been decided on the first ballot since 1948 and 1952. Democrat superdelegates could tip the balance, perhaps. And if you're looking at it from the point of view of those trying to stop Donald Trump or support Bernie Sanders, then the fact that all nominations have been decided on the first ballot is a big problem for you. Okay? So, thank you very much.
As I said, it's a heroic effort to be able to condense so much history into a really clear and engaging presentation. So thank you for that, and thanks for our overview on our elections process and what the office here in the county does. We're going to turn now to our political parties, what they're doing, and our delegates who are here with us today. It's going to be my job to keep the panel discussions moving along at a fairly fast clip. So we do have John sitting in front of all of us. He's going to be holding up, I guess, a yellow card when people have 15 seconds left, and a red card to say, hey, your time's up for now. We can always come back to topics should there be a need. I thank the panelists in advance for following the cues, and I'll tell you all, we're on a first name basis because we're just such good friends by now, I think, on this panel. So I am going to start first by introducing our 2 party leaders in a little more depth. So Nancy Keenan. Nancy serves, as I said, the executive director for the Montana Democratic Party. She's a native of Anaconda and attended Montana State University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in elementary and special education. She taught special ed in Billings and in Anaconda, and she earned a master's of education from UM. Nancy worked as a teacher while also serving 4 terms in the Montana House of Representatives, before serving as Montana's Superintendent of Public Instruction. After running for a seat in Congress, she worked in Washington, D.C. for several advocacy organizations before returning to Montana in 2012. Jeff Essman is chairman of the Montana Republican Party. He started out as a precinct captain in his hometown of Billings. He served 2 terms as chairman of the Yellowstone Republican Central Committee in the 1990s, and he was a delegate to the 1996 National Convention. He served 10 years in the Montana Senate, including serving as Senate President in 2013, and he is now a member of the Montana House of Representatives. He will attend this summer's Republican National Convention as an automatic delegate because of the position that he holds with the state party. Jeff earned his Bachelor's of Science degree in Industrial Engineering from the Illinois Institute of Technology and his JD from the University of Montana. Now, the League of Women Voters asked our panelist leaders to prepare a few remarks, but to begin, I'd first like to offer both Jeff and Nancy the opportunity for a quick, I'm going to say 1 minute, addition to anything that either Jennifer or Rebecca brought up in regards to your party, anything you'd like to share with the audience regarding election process and the history of your party.
Just one point that I'd like to make very briefly is that the rules do change, and after 68 and then again in 88 that we changed on the superdelegates and actually giving more leverage then to the delegates versus the unpledged or superdelegates. But more importantly, I think back in after some time that the party also wanted the party to be representative of everybody. And so we had an affirmative action clause that said that women and people of color had to be included, LGBT and youth have to be included, and then again, persons with disabilities. So I think that when you watch the Democratic National Convention, you're going to see a very different face of the country at our convention.
Jeff.
Good evening. I'm happy to be back on a campus I really spent a lot of time on about 40 years ago. But the Montana Republican Party had its delegate convention just last weekend in my hometown of Billings. We elected 24 delegates. The state is allotted 21 delegates by a formula of the Republican National Committee and 3 delegates because we have 1 congressional district. And we elected 24 alternates. We also have rules within our party to have a broad and diverse representation, and I believe our oldest delegate will be 91, and I believe our youngest will be 17 or 18. So we're excited to be going to Cleveland here in about 7 weeks.
So both of our state party leaders have been asked ahead of time to cover the details of the different kinds of delegates who are elected and then who go to the national conventions and what they're expected to do there. We, I believe, have now a chart on the screen that may serve as a reference to those of you in the audience. And so I'm going to turn again now to Nancy to please help our audience understand some of your party's major rules and processes as we imagine that there will be some Montana Democratic citizens ultimately getting elected and then going on to Philadelphia.
That's right. So this is a fast turnaround for the Democrats because the primary is June 7th, and then we request that the county central committees have their county meetings on June 9th, and then we have our state convention on June 10th and 11th in Helena, where we will both do the platform convention adoption of our platform as well as selecting our delegates. As been mentioned that in Montana for the Democrats, we have 27 delegates selected for the national convention. 21 of those are pledge delegates. Those are folks that are elected proportionally by the vote in those counties. So how does that look? whoever wins a county, let's just pick Park County, and let's just say that Bernie Sanders wins Park County, then he will proportionally have more delegates coming out of Park than would Secretary Clinton. And that happens all over the state. So by the time they come to Helena, it is based on who received the most votes in the state and proportionately given to the delegates across the state. We have 6 superdelegates, or unpledged delegates. Those folks are elected officials and elected party officials. So we have obviously Governor Steve Bullock, we have U.S. Senator John Tester, our elected officials. We have Jean Dahlman from Forsyth is our National Committee woman, and we have George Quintana, who is our National Committee man. And then we have our chair and vice chair of the state party, who happen to be Jim Larson, and Jim Larson and Jackie Helt. So those are the 6 unpledged delegates who usually do not indicate their preference at all until after Montanans have voted. So then once all of those delegates in Helena, again, we put them into, the Bernie people aren't going to run against the Hillary people, right? So the Bernie people will have their caucuses, east and west, proportionately based on how many votes were out there, as will the West, the East, the Hillary and Bernie folks will meet, and they will choose their delegates then from those local delegates who get to go to the national convention. And so they are chosen there in Helena. At the national convention then, again, our pledged delegates they have to vote for whom they're representing that first ballot. If it goes to a second ballot, they are free then to vote how they choose. But again, I think it's been pretty rare that we've gone to a second ballot nationally at that national convention. So that's how our delegate process works. Again, we have an affirmative action plank basically that says we have to have representatives of men and women, we have to have a representative of our Native American community here, our disability community, our LGBTQ community, and making sure that it truly is the face of Montana and that it's not just the same old crowd that gets to go every year.
So Jeff, you've mentioned that we already have our delegates for the National Convention for the Republican Party. Can you please explain a little more of those categories and then the process for what happens next with your party?
You bet. The Montana process for the Republican Party was unique this time in my memory. The Republican National Committee adopted the choice to move our convention up until mid-July, and then adopted a rule requiring that all states have their delegates selected 45 days before the National Convention, which that date is June 13th, which is, of course, a very short time after our June 7th primary. So at the June convention in 2015, the Montana Party decided to have the convention earlier, which is why it occurred in May. So we select the people that will be traveling to Cleveland before the primary. That process started with conventions in each county of the precinct people, and those are people that are either elected by Republicans in their county or appointed by the Central Committee to precinct positions. Those people voted to elect delegates to come to the Billings Delegate Convention, which occurred last weekend. Those delegates elected 24 people to travel to Cleveland. There were 166 names on that ballot for the Cleveland Convention delegates, and we, under our state party rules, which were also adopted in 2015, will be bound to vote for the first place finisher in the presidential preference primary on June 7th. Now that is not necessarily a majority winner. It could and is often a plurality, because Montana is not a majority election state. It is a plurality election state, which means if you come in first, you're elected, and we'll be following that process in terms of of the June 7th results. Our delegates will not be bound after the first ballot at the convention if that ballot is not determinative.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to move along to the other four people we have here. These are 4 people who have tremendous expertise within their political parties as well, and that includes experience serving as delegates to their parties' national conventions. I'm going to introduce all of them together, and then we'll hear from each one of them. So I'm starting with Louise Bruce. Louise traveled from California to attend the University of Montana in 1979, and as a student, she worked on her first campaign while earning her degree in recreation management. She's since worked for numerous campaigns. She's run for election herself. She's managed a statewide initiative campaign, chaired the Beaverhead County Democrats, and served on the executive board of the Montana Democratic Party. She attended the 2000 Democratic National Convention as a delegate. Jim Elliott grew up in Pennsylvania, earned his degree in physiological psychology at San Francisco State, and has been active in politics for 3 decades. He served as a Montana legislator in the House from 1989 to 1995, and in the Senate from 2001 until through 2009, when he chaired the Senate Taxation Committee for 2 sessions. He served as chair of the Montana Democratic Party from 2009 to 2013, and went to 1 uncontested national convention as a superdelegate, and now lives and works on the ranch in Trout Creek. Thelma Baker has been active in politics in Missoula for 3 decades. She has served in many positions: chair of the Missoula County Republican Women, chair of Missoula County Republican Central Committee, and charter member and current board member of the Pachyderm Club at the national, state, and county levels. She has been a delegate to 2 national Republican conventions and has been elected to the Electoral College 4 times. Will Dayshaw was raised on a ranch west of Missoula, where his mother was active in the League of Women Voters. He served as a U.S. Marine in Vietnam before earning his bachelor's degree in business management at the University of Montana. Will spent 14 years as a Hellgate Elementary School trustee and 6 years as chairman of the Montana Republican Party. He has also served as a party delegate at state and national party conventions. So Louise, I'm going to start back down there with you. If you could take, and I'll ask each of you take about 2 minutes for these questions. If you could tell us what kind of delegate you were and how you were expected to vote on that first ballot, and also the takeaways or lasting impressions you have from going to a national convention.
Sure. Thanks for having me here tonight. It's always a wonderful opportunity to share with people my experience in going to a national convention, because if you're a volunteer like I am, and particularly in a tough place for Democrats like Beaverhead County, there's no better reward that you can give yourself than winning a slot as a pledged delegate to a national convention. And that's how I went to the convention in 2000 as a pledged delegate. It was an uncontested convention at that point. Al Gore was the nominee. And I can tell you it was an electrifying experience. And if you are a volunteer and you've ever had the experience of seeing a candidate or being, have your heart and mind completely into an issue or a cause, I think you guys should reward yourself by going to a convention. It's similar to watching, when you watch your favorite football team on television, you see all the details, you have all the close-up views. When you go to a live game, you don't always have that detail, but you have all the energy of everybody around you. And I can tell you that there's nothing like being in a huge, huge convention center that is just jammed with people who you agree with and people who are excited to get back out and work for that person to be the President of the United States. So I think it was incredibly exciting for me to go there, and I can probably go on and on and on and tell you all kinds of stories, just like everybody else who's been to a convention.
So moving next to Jim. Again, please share with us the takeaways and impressions from being a delegate, and then also your role at the convention.
Well, thank you. I was a delegate to the 2012 convention where Barack Obama ran unopposed. I can tell you there was not a lot of drama in my decision to vote for Barack Obama. The convention has some dynamic speakers, extraordinarily dynamic and inspirational. And I view a convention as a place to showcase the party's ideals and the party's energy and what the party stands for. There is an interesting dynamic which has been touched upon earlier between the party activists and the party regulars. And this is a dynamic, I think, that's very important and very healthy. The activists are generally in either party to the extreme, more extreme end of the political spectrum, Republicans to the right, Democrats to the left. They're more idealistic. The party officials and the elected officials are more practical or more cautious, whichever you wish to say. Their job is to find a candidate who can be elected. And for that reason, the candidates tend to be more in the middle rather than at the extreme edges. However, the activists move the party direction, move the party philosophy, as it were, in the direction of their chosen cause. And that is a very healthy thing and a very good thing. So essentially, I guess the dynamic is between idealism and electability, enthusiasm versus experience, and idealism versus control of outcome.
Okay, now Thelma, and we have a mic for you. So you've been to 2 national conventions for your party, and you have, I guess I'd say, at least twice as much experience in those electrifying gatherings. So I'd love to know your impressions and takeaways, and you know, what kind of delegate you were asked to serve as.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank everyone for being here. It's just, it's so good to see all these faces. Thank you again for being here. As been stated, I have been elected to attend 2 delegates, or 2 conventions as a delegate. The first one was in 2004, and that was held in New York. The second one was in Minneapolis, and that was in 2008. I also was very honored to be selected to serve on the Credentials Committee for both of the conventions. In the Republican Party, the Credentials Committee, each state is represented by 1 man and 1 woman. My seatmate for the first convention was Rick Hill, and for the second convention was Jim Brown. The Credentials Committee is extremely formal in the Republican Party. And of course, the convention cannot start without the Credentials Committee checking every single credential of every person in every state that is going to be a delegate and vote. So I guess, you know, I was just excited to be asked to be on this credential committee both times. I came away with the honor of meeting many people from other states, and I could hear their concerns, and I had a high regard and respect the way both of the conventions were held. Thank you.
And Will, we'd love your thoughts, your takeaways, and also in what capacity you served.
I've attended 1 national convention, and I went by merit of the fact that I was a state party chair. Again, that would have been the Romney election. And Some takeaways, I made some notes here and then I'll try and expound upon them. The biggest thing that I noticed was the security that was in place at the convention. There was at least 3 levels of security that you needed to go through just to get into the hall. I suspect it'll be no different this year either. For instance, the state chairman is responsible for picking up all of the credentials for each day for each delegate that's attending the convention. I was walked out to a vehicle by an armed guard with this box full of these credentials. So, I mean, it was unbelievable how the security was organized, and you'll get a chance to go through that this year. The press, too, is another thing. The press, we had 2,500 delegates in 2012. There were 15,000 credentialed press credentials issued. That's kind of shocking. You couldn't go anywhere where there wasn't a camera in your face. And I ended up on one on Fox News for some reason. The other thing that I took away was the pomp and circumstance. Politics aside, it is a big party, it is a big show, and people that have a desire to be involved in those sorts of things should go. It is a wonderful, wonderful experience, regardless of what side of the aisle that you come from. As you might recall, one of the other takeaways in 2012 is we did have some problems at the convention. They were internal. That was the Ron Paul and the Romney side of it. But those things will happen, and they have a tendency to go away after a while.
Not before those 15,000 media people get on top of it, I guess. Say, both Louise and Will have mentioned that you should consider being a delegate. So my question would be for someone here, a couple of you, how does somebody, a general citizen who's active in his or her party, become a delegate? What do you have to do?
You want me to go first?
Sure.
So as the chair of the Beaverhead County Democratic Party, after the primary election is held and we hold a county convention to determine who our delegates will be to the state convention, that's where people, that's the place where people can get involved if they want to come and be a delegate potentially to the national convention. Is first they have to come to before their county and convince people in their county, in their neighborhood, that are Democrats, that they're the ones that we should elect to send to the state convention. So that's really the first
That's
step.
how it works. Okay. Jeff?
The process in our party I would characterize as a lot more open than the Democrat process, because the people that are interested in going to the Republican National Convention can simply go to, many did, simply went to our website, downloaded the form that they could nominate themselves and placed thereby got their name on that ballot that appeared before the state convention last weekend. I think that's one of the reasons we had 166 candidates. We had a little event at Saturday morning before the convention proper came in, and that event allowed those 166 people, at least the ones that showed up, to campaign to the 120 plus delegates that the county committee sent to campaign for that election to that slot. So they had about 2.5 hours to size each other up, and then we had a vote after lunch.
Nancy, 30 seconds there.
You bet. I just want to add to Louise's comments. She was saying you can start at the county, but you can show up at our convention as well, very similarly at the state convention in Helena. Sign up and come and be a delegate and run, as Louise said, and kind of put yourself before your peers. So it is not restricted to being the county first and then you make your way up. You can show up in Helena on June 10th and 11th as well and be a delegate.
So we had a reference by Thelma to serving on the Credentials Committee. As we know, conventions are not just about party platforms. They're not just about the delegates. The question of how conventions are run, the rules by which they operate, also has been in the spotlight these last few months. in April, not really that long ago, really in mid-April, news outlets were explaining the importance of the Republican National Convention Rules Committee. CNN called it in one report the most powerful group you've never heard of. And they stated this time, and this was early to mid-April, this time almost everything is a fight and there's no guarantee what will happen. And then we've been hearing of late more and more about the Democratic Convention. It's promising, quote, to get messy, as one news outlet said, with some people protesting how delegates to the convention's standing committees are being selected. So given a very complex situation in which party rules give party leadership options to influence outcomes, I'd like both of our state leaders here to just talk about what does your party's leadership take into account in considering who would be the best nominee for president and how this should work through all the various rules and processes. I'll start with Nancy and then move to Jeff on this.
Well, I think there's a couple things. And again, it's the voices of the people. If you remember, Winston Churchill said, a true leader's ears ring with the voices of the people. And so there's two ways, I think, in the Democratic Party. One is our platform, which is a statement of our values. And so that is, again, written by Democrats in the state of Montana, and then they go to the National Convention, same process happens. And so when we're looking for somebody to be our nominee for the president, I think we look, one, who is it that will champion our values, articulate the values that we share as a party, whether it's from agriculture to labor to working families to the environment, and on, we articulate those values. The second part is, I think we look at leadership skills. And those are individual for us as Democratic members. And I think there are things that we think about, do they have the intellect that basically can analyze not only the problems facing this country, but the world? Do they have integrity? Are they compassionate? Do they have humility, and are they honest? Are they fearless, and are they self-aware? And I think ultimately we look at, will you unite and not divide? And I think this time, for us in our party anyway, it is about that kind of leadership that is inclusive and not exclusive.
Jeff.
The Republican Party has always, branded itself as a very grassroots organization, bottom up. And I have to say that this election cycle, it truly has been that. Although it was clear that the donor class in the Republican Party at a minimum supported a number of fairly establishment candidates to the tune of a couple $100 million. It was pretty clear that the voters in the Republican primaries, on the other hand, were much more interested in tipping over the tables in terms of bringing a change to Washington that they feel is necessary. And both Senator Elliott and I have had the good experience of being legislative candidates, and you learn a lot from going door to door and listening to people. And it's been my sense through my elections as a legislator that that level of frustration's been growing, and I think it's reflected itself this year in the outcomes of the Republican primary. And so we've got an unconventional candidate because I believe our voters within our party believe the country needs a change, and they want somebody from outside Washington to bring that change. And I think that's probably what's going to happen in our July convention.
So we've approached essentially the halfway mark for our forum. So I want to remind you that during the second part of the forum, we will be taking questions. So if you haven't had a chance to write a question yet down on an index card, please take this time during the upcoming break to do that. And I want to remind all of you in the audience that this forum is focused on the process used to select our candidates for president. And though it's tempting, we're not going to ask our party leaders or delegates to share any strategies or predictions about the race. They may volunteer, but we're not going to ask them. On my right is a table where you can pick up a copy of that chart that explained the complicated processes for both of the parties. And so if you'd like one, please feel free to take one. And there also is a sign-up sheet, I believe, that has been going around or maybe at the table. If you're interested in learning about future forums, you can please indicate that. And then over here during the break, we have refreshments. I want to thank the University of Montana UC Catering Operation and the Good Food Store for being generous and donating some treats for us. We will take a 10-minute break. I will, in about 8 minutes, I'll remind you that, give you the 2-minute warning so we can be back in our seats and we can continue with the forum. Thanks so much. We have, if you haven't turned yet, index card in with a question, please do so. And I'm going to jump right in with the question that I'd like to ask each of the 4 delegates to just take 1 minute each to answer. How would you respond to someone in your party who would ask you this question? With everything that goes on at the national conventions, will my primary vote even matter? So, Jim. Oh, okay, Jim, and then we'll move to Del.
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. But I would say that if the only reason you are going to vote in a primary election is to elect a president, you're selling yourself awfully short, because there are an awful lot of very, very important down ballot people who are running primaries. One vote in Montana does make a difference. One vote, for instance, has determined the party control of the legislature 2 or 3 times. So it matters in that regard.
All right, I'd like to ask Thelma to answer that question next, if you don't mind.
Well, I think I would tell people that people die in other countries for the right to vote. So please exercise your right. Also, one vote can make a difference because it's the deciding factor for the Electoral College.
Louise?
I'm going to say yes to what Thelma said and yes to what Jim said. And I just think that as an American, that's the first thing you need to do. That's your first civic, citizen, person, good human being thing you need to do is vote.
Okay, Will.
Well, if you remember several years ago, people said, well, I don't want to vote because, or I didn't vote for that person. I didn't vote. Well, if you don't vote, you don't really have a right to complain about anything. So it's important that you vote. Now, does a primary vote count when it comes to the delegates at the convention? I believe it does, because particularly under our rules, you're bound by that winner of that primary ballot. So I believe it does count, and I think it's becoming to count more and more and more. The more people that are involved, the better issues that we hear about, and the better that people are informed.
I'm going to now ask a question that is from the Missoula League of Women Voters, and it's for our state political party leaders, so I'll ask this first of Jeff and then Nancy. Under what conditions can your party give money or support to presidential candidates during the primary season? And if you could also speak to the purpose of any rules that are involved and how they are enforced.
I believe there are rules that permit us to give money to our national candidates, but that hasn't really been an issue for the Montana Republican Party. Our goal is to elect Republicans statewide, and any funds that we raise, I know I will be happy to spend with Montana media here trying to get our candidates elected.
Okay.
I think the same is true with Democrats. I mean, I think we could as a party send money to whoever our nominee eventually is. I think the question is better served saying, how do we use our money? And it's much that we make sure that our governor is reelected, and we make sure that our statewide and legislative candidates, so money that comes into the Democratic Party by individual donors, hard-earned money, then we do turn around and help people that share our values, and our Democrats get elected predominantly at the congressional and the state and the legislative level. We leave kind of the county races to the county central committees and some of those county elections locally, but tend to focus mostly on congressional, statewide elected offices and legislature.
Okay, I have a question for both parties, and we'll take a couple answers from each party. It could be one of the leaders or delegates. The question is, perhaps it's only every 4 years that the general public becomes interested in these processes and how we move toward electing a president. And they might wonder, so about these party conventions, what is accomplished at the conventions that can't be accomplished with a straight party vote?
I'll grab that one. The advent of technology has led to a much flatter political process in this country. I mean, the parties were necessary prior to the telegraph because simply there was no means of communication. And as the means of our communication have improved, we've gone from, basically a party convention or caucus system to preference primaries and now some binding primaries. And there are suggestions on the national level that we should just have a direct election of the president by vote. But the weakness there is we've got a 50-state country, and that requires coalition building, and that's why you have two parties, because it is the only way those coalitions can come together to try to effect what is basically a 50-state election.
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons it's really important. And one, you come together of, as Louise said, like-minded people, and sometimes in some pretty tough counties for Democrats out there in Montana. And we come together and first we do a platform. And we say, what do we stand for? What do we value? What are we going to fight for? What's going to be the agenda in the legislature? What are we going to ask Congress and the governor to do as we try to move an agenda, a very positive, proactive agenda forward? So platform's part of the equation. Other part of the equation is that you come together as people and friends to discuss the issue around the presidential race and the importance of that and the balance of Congress. And quite honestly, bottom line here, who controls and who has the power, and where do you want the country to go? Where do you want the country to go? So that's an opportunity to be with our friends and our colleagues and our neighbors and actually have those conversations. And I think we need to have more of those conversations because to Jeff's point, the whole emergence of technology sometimes has put a barrier up with us talking to each other, listening to each other. So I think it's important to get together as a party and have those discussions.
So I have a question now, which I'll ask of our four delegates. It's fairly simple, maybe 30 seconds, maybe it's simple. Who finances the delegates to attend conferences? How do you pay to get to those conferences and pay your expenses?
Do you want me to go first? I got the mic
I think
first.
Will's ready to go.
You have to pay it on your own. You're on your own nickel. And of course, that's one of the concerns that we have when we are voting for delegates is that the questionnaire that's sent out to people that fill out this nomination form, one of the things that we've added in the later years is you do realize that this is going to cost approximately between this, and that you have to pay that. That sometimes weeds people out, unfortunately, but no, we are on our own dime. Even the chairman is on his own dime, too. I thought as chairman I'd be able to have the party pay for it. The party didn't pay for it, so no, you're on your own nickel.
Louise?
Yep, you are on your own. There's no corporate sponsorships or anything else. You have to figure out how you're going to get yourself there. And I know a lot of our delegates from the county level will go ahead and have fundraisers for themselves, and sometimes their local central committees will host some fundraisers on their behalf. So you do have a support network among your Democratic brothers and sisters, but you're the one responsible for the bill.
And it's great to be honored to ask to serve on one of the committees. But remember, you have to go 3 days early on your own dime again. So that's an additional amount.
I have a follow-up to that. So when you go for those days ahead of time, what's happening then? What's going on?
The Rules Committee meets and the Credentials Committee, because the convention cannot start without everyone being credentialed. And of course, the rules all have to be approved.
Jim, anything else to add there as a delegate?
Well, as a delegate, as an unpledged delegate chairman of the party, the Montana Democratic Party, paid my way and paid the way of a couple of other people. The convention lasts a week, and California has put in a proposed resolution to make it last a weekend so that working people can afford to go to it.
Okay. So my next question, this is the preface and then the question. As we all know, this has been a primary season around the country filled with questions and accusations about our election and party nominations process. In both parties, we've had candidates for the presidency themselves talk about the unfairness of process and rules. Question, what tools does the party have at the national level to influence who gets the nomination? And what changes to the party nomination process might we see in 2020? So what tools does the party have at the national level to influence who gets the nomination?
Well, the primary tool actually is the adoption of the convention rules. As Senator Elliott will agree, the most important vote when the legislature organizes itself is the vote on the rules at the beginning, because every startup legislature and every startup convention is what I call an organic body. It is brand new, and if it wishes to adopt the former rules or tweak them a little bit, it can do that. If it wants to tear them up and throw them out, it has the power to do that. And there have been conventions, not in the last number of decades, but there have been some where there were important rules changes made that, in fact, dictated the outcome of the convention itself. So that's the primary way that the people, through the delegates, election process can control the process.
Yeah, the same is true for the Democratic Party, is that you do have the rules and the credentialing, and it's pretty similar. And in addition to that, with the rules, a lot of that is done, at least discussions about it happened before, as we were talking about here with the Republicans too. I think there was some confusion this primary. That is something that was rigged. Everybody was operating on the same rules that were adopted last time. Now they can change them coming into this convention, but the rules were the rules were the rules. And the fact that we have about 4,763 delegates that'll show up in Philadelphia, that those are your delegates, your ones that are pledged. And then we have only 712 delegates that are your unpledged, or what has been referenced as super delegates. So you see the power leverage there. The actual delegates that are elected from our states and go there are more than the super delegates. And I think there was some confusion around the kind of balance of power there.
And the second question there was asking you to look into your future and the crystal ball. Anyone want to say, are there changes to the party nominating process we might see in 2020? I'm not sure we can look out that far, but I know they asked that about the University of Montana. We do have a strategic plan for 2020, but we're about to revise it.
We can't even look into 2016, so it's going to be tough looking to 2020.
Okay.
If I might add something to the superdelegate question has disturbed some state parties, and in the DNC West, Democratic National Committee West, is asked to reduce the number of superdelegates to at least 5% of the total, or to not allow the superdelegates to endorse anyone before the primary vote. Alaska passed a resolution to eliminate the superdelegates or make them vote the primary results.
Now, I understand we don't use the term superdelegates with the Republican Party. So is that correct, Jeff?
No, the only we use the term automatic delegates, and each state has just 3, and that is the person who holds the chairmanship, and then the national committee man and national committee woman. And I believe in most of the states, those delegates are follow the same binding rules that the elected delegates at the convention are bound to.
So this is a question for both parties. Since national party conventions are partly subsidized by taxpayer funds, basically, I believe, for security, and we did hear a little bit about the tremendous security needed. Since party conventions are partly subsidized by taxpayer funds, should there be some form of government oversight on behalf of the public?
I was just reading an article today that had to do with that very point, and to my knowledge, the only public money that's going to be spent on both sides is for security only. It used to be in 2012, I think the taxpayer was on the hook for $30 to $40 million to each of the parties, and then the party was on the hook for the rest, and the whole cities were on the hook too to help put the convention on. But I believe that the public funds have been removed to a large extent, other than security, and I believe that's $100 million.
Yeah.
Those public funds that Will is talking about, I believe, were taken out of a presidential election or presidential nominating fund that was a tax checkoff on the on your income tax forms. You know, if you cut it back from a week to a weekend, you're going to have a lot smaller bill for security.
So here's the next question. What is the difference between an open primary and a closed primary? And which would you favor for Montana and why? Open versus closed primary. First, we need that reminder of what the difference is. And then, do you favor one or the other?
I'll be happy to address that, because that's always a topic of interest with inside the Republican Party. An open primary is one where anybody can come in and vote in the primary. A closed primary is one that is restricted to members of the party, those people who have identified themselves with the party. There are a lot of variations around the country in terms of little tweaks to that system. I was talking this afternoon with the chairman of the Arizona Republican Party, and they have a semi-open primary, and there in that state you can register as a Democrat, a Libertarian, a Republican, a Green, or an Independent. The largest voting bloc in Arizona is registered independents. At the time you either go to the polls, or if you vote by mail, you get a card in the mail that says, which ballot would you like to get this year if you're an independent? And those people check the box, Republican, Democrat, Independent, and mail it in, and that way they get a chance to vote in that primary. So there are many variations on that theme.
Yeah, we talked about this early in the presentation about how when you as a voter walks into the voting booth on June 7th, you're handed both, each in a little envelope or whatever, and then once you get in that booth, you get a pick if you're going to vote down the Republican side or you're going to vote the Democratic side. What I think happens often is that if there are no contested primaries, And yet there's really somebody, and I'll use the example of many of our sheriff candidates, they might be running as a Republican, and you might consider yourself a Democrat, but there's really nothing happening on the Democratic side. There might not be somebody running for sheriff, or there might be no contested primaries. People will often vote on the opposite party because they really like the sheriff, or they really like that individual in that county. The opposite is true as well. I think that there might be some races that on the Republican side that they say, he's my neighbor, I just think he's great and I want him to be a legislator. And there's a contested primary over there. But I don't think there's any malice in it. I mean, I think that there's been a lot of misrepresentation that there's malice in this open primary business. I think it gives people a choice. You walk in, it's private, you decide who you want to vote for, and we don't close people out in a closed primary and make people choose publicly.
I would add to that we do not register by party in the state of Montana. The taxpayer picks up the entire bill for the primary elections in the county and the state level. And I think that the taxpayer should have that option of voting for whatever party they want to vote for in the privacy of their closet, as it were.
I want to bring a historical perspective to the open and closed primary business because I was embroiled in it as the chairman. Years ago, the Democrat Party in the legislature proposed closing registration, having closed primaries, and the Republicans opposed it. Now, fast forward to last year, the Republican Party wanted to close primaries and the Democrats opposed it. So I don't know what's best one way or the other, but we seem to be on both sides at several times or at the same time.
You know, it's a nod to our history teacher. We always need to remember there's the long-term perspective as well, and I thank you for that. This is a question again about how this very complicated process works. Do the elected delegates from both parties in Montana have to reflect the exact results of the primary vote on that first vote at the National Convention? And do the superdelegates reflect the primary vote?
In the Democratic Party, yes. Those delegates that are elected to go have to, and if they're a Bernie delegate or if they're a Clinton delegate, they have to, on that first ballot, vote who they were sent to represent on that first ballot. The superdelegates or unpledged delegates do not have to follow what basically was the primary vote of the state. So they aren't, that's why they're called unpledged. And they can go either way, depending on how they want to vote. And as Jim had explained earlier, in part this is a little bit more of your folks that are much more intimately involved in the political process, trying to maybe move somebody to the middle. But in Montana, we only have 6. We have 21 of the other delegates. 6 aren't going to move that needle too far one way or another.
For the Republican Party.
Our convention in 2015 made the decision that we were going to be, the Montana Republican Party was going to be a winner-take-all state in terms of our observing the outcome of the primary. And I believe that was done because we were hopeful that that perhaps if the race was close late in the process, that we'd be able to bring a candidate here and excite our base and raise some money. So unfortunately, the best laid plans didn't turn out. So we'll be bound by the winner-take-all system. But we will have our at least our presumptive nominee will be in Billings later this week.
That's right. So that does get me to a question that we've received about Montana's primary and the timing of it. Why is it so late in the lineup? How are these dates determined across the country?
Good question. Maybe the county clerk and recorder can answer that one in the sense of how Montana's primary date was set.
Well, I know there was a bill last year to move it to August, so I'm happy with June. So I believe Jennifer might have more insight onto that, but It's set by law in the Constitution, and I believe that's how by the state legislature.
I think so.
I do recall that there was some movement. I was in the legislature then back in the 80s, and there was some movement to actually try to get a regional primary date agreed on by Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and maybe the Dakotas for exactly Jeff's point. We were the flyover state, right? Nobody had ever show up here, even though we voted and we wanted to choose who we wanted as a president or a nominee. And so, but the regional idea never took hold. And I think there's still discussion about that in some parts, because we are kind of out flanked by Ohio, New Hampshire, and those first ones that happen. And so I think we tried to get a regional primary back at that time, but nobody could agree because Oregon liked their date, Montana liked their date, Idaho liked their date. So we could never quite agree to get all those legislative bodies on a regional primary date. So could be moved, but right now it's June 7th and it is pretty late in the cycle.
And my impression is there was a bill, I think my first session in 2005, to also do a regional primary. A lot of the legislators opposed it because you know, the spring primary, they liked the fact that the presidential nominee was on that June ballot because it increased turnout. If you separated the presidential primary and had it in March, it might reduce turnout in June, and nobody wants to be campaigning in January for a legislative seat, going door to door, which, our districts are small. It's pretty easy for a legislative candidate in an urban district in particular to, knock on those doors. And I think that's a value to the people of Montana.
This is a question for both parties, and it's first talking with the preface. In the general election, on election night, care traditionally has been taken by the news media in reporting the general election results. So as we move through the time zones and the polls close, they traditionally have refrained from announcing returns until polls are closed as we move across the country. And ideally not to influence voting or not to discourage people from going to the polls because a race has been called. During the primary season, which we know goes for months and months, the media and everyone else repeating results, giving you delegate counts, predictions of who will be at the convention, who will have the nomination, predicting fights, predicting confusion. So what effect does that kind of very consistent month-over-month attention and coverage on predictions of outcomes have on this nomination process from the political parties' perspectives? Does it make a difference? Does it matter to voters or to the parties in the states, especially as we move toward the later states like Montana?
I would just recite my point that if the only reason you go to the polls is to vote for the president, you're selling yourself short. And no matter what the prediction is for the president, you still have those down-ticket races that are very, very important in your state.
Now, I think I could take the liberty to say sometimes we all get inundated with too much information at times. So here's the next question. It's a big question. Has your national party leadership shown any favor for any candidates in this primary election season in any way?
Nancy, why don't you go ahead? Because I think that one was directed to you.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. Rice Priebus was getting a lot of grief pretty well as well. So,
I think there's always perception. And again, the rules are the rules are the rules. And I don't think any one individual can influence the rules by how the primary cycle has been conducted. And sometimes it's frustrated because people don't understand the process. It took me a while to understand, now, how come these people do this caucus thing, and how crazy is that? You know, because I think our primary is fair, I think it's proportional, I think it's understandable. But, so I think there has been perception that the leadership of the Democratic National Committee has had a favorite. Maybe personal she has, but even if she got to vote, she's only one vote. And the rules are the rules, and everybody's playing by the rules, and sometimes we don't like the outcome of an election. But, you know, to me, again, I'll go back to what Jim was saying. People show up to vote, then that has more weight than any one individual, any party, anything. The power is in the individual's right to go vote and have your voice heard.
Reince Priebus, our national chairman, has, I think, received a lot of criticism because he didn't get involved and show any favoritism for a particular candidate. He's you know, when you start a cycle with 17 candidates, you know, it's always going to be an interesting cycle, and it was for him. The Republican Party nationally has just now formed a joint fundraising agreement between the presumptive nominee and the National Party, and I was just reading this morning a really strongly worded op-ed by Margot Kidder criticizing 33 state parties for forming joint fundraising agreements with one of the Democratic candidates that Ms. Kidder did not support. So, you know, there has been a difference between the parties with that regard.
Can I just follow up on that? Jeff, I really appreciate that, because there has been some concern that the Montana Democratic Party has a joint fundraising agreement, which we do with the Clinton campaign. The Bernie Sanders folks never contacted the party to do that. It was open to him, and it was absolutely open to Martin O'Malley. And neither of those candidates ever contacted Montana and many other states. So what does a joint fundraising agreement mean? It means that when money is raised, it builds the party. Montana got not one dime of that. So money that came into the state actually just turns around and ends up going back to the Democratic National Committee to build the parties. So in a place where we're not like a swing state, and we don't have the, you know, like we're not in Arizona, we're not in Ohio, we're not a Florida, where the presidential plays so heavily. Those monies go back, they build the party. Our state party does get money from the National Committee, so some of that money will eventually come back in different ways, but it's not like they just wrote us a check between the Clinton folks and the party and us. That was, I think, some confusion on that part and how it actually works.
So we've had several references through the evening to the rules, and it reminds me of one essay I was reading in preparation for our forum tonight, and it was like, he who rules, rules. The importance of the rules and the agreements on the rules. So the question that's come is, who enforces the rules of your national party? Who's the enforcer?
Well, it's the person in the chair with the gavel, just like it is on the floor of the legislature. And then, of course, there is an appeal from a ruling of the chair, and then it's up to the body itself to either agree or disagree with the ruling of the chair. So ultimately, it is the assembled convention.
Same thing. Similarly for the Democratic Party. So this is a question possibly for Jennifer or for anyone else. Please take a minute or so to tell us, so what happened in 1948 and 1952 when the first round vote did not result in a decision of who was to be the nominee? I believe you said it had been more than 50 years. Do you have the specifics?
52. I don't have the specifics.
What happened?
Sorry, I don't.
Have conventions ever shifted the nomination away from the popular vote? Were those the two times?
Those weren't shifts away from the popular vote. Excuse me, those were not shifts away from the popular vote. It just meant that it took more than one ballot for the party to decide.
Have we ever had a shift away from the popular vote? There's been a lot of talk this year that that could happen, or we don't want that to happen. Not in our history.
I think back in the mid-century, there weren't that many primaries. I mean, as late as 1976, I know there was a knockdown, drag-out Republican state convention in my hometown between the supporters of Ronald Reagan, the supporters of Gerald Ford, and there was, I mean, that knockdown, drag-out fight resulted in Reagan winning the delegates there, and they went to the convention supporting him, and there was no popular vote to ignore or follow.
Question for both parties, and I think for everyone here at the table. What do you see as the advantages and disadvantages of how our current presidential nomination process works? Advantages and disadvantages of this process.
Well, it doesn't start to get fun until you got 17 candidates running. I mean, that was a mess. And you talk about people that were at each other's throats. I mean, that just happens. I think that to make changes in that process goes against what we believe a person should have the right to do. And a person wants to run for office, they run for office. And they stand on their own 2 feet, and they take what comes. If there were a way, if I had Midas touch and I could say, pick the candidates that could run, and you could only run 5 people, that might solve the problems, but that goes against everything that we believe in this country.
I think the disadvantage of the primary process is that you wind up with the person who can campaign harder than the other people. The advantage of that is you wind up with a person who can campaign harder than the other people.
Yeah, this one's an interesting question to me because I think, and I'm going to go back to the primary versus a caucus and participation. Because in a primary, it's all about turnout. It's all about if people take the time, and in the general, but if they take the time to register to vote and go vote. So the more people that vote, I think it's more representative of who you really want as a president. In the caucus, that's a curious process to me because literally it's a handful of your party activists that might show up. So in a state with millions of people, it might be a caucus of only several thousand, maybe even 20, I don't know. And yet that small group of people then is choosing their nominee from that particular state. So I'm glad we're a primary state, quite honestly. I think the caucuses lean more towards not fully representative of all the voters. But the bottom line is get people registered, get them to vote, get them to participate. Or as someone said earlier, you're left with who your elected official is if you didn't vote.
So I've got time for maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll do some wrap-up. Recently, some states have adopted a so-called blanket primary, where the top 2 vote getters, regardless of party, run in the general. We're not talking about the presidential here, but what do you think about that idea?
I'll be happy to take that one, and I'm only speaking for myself, not the Republican Party. I do think the blanket primary has some merit, and that is because it will ensure that the winning candidate receives a majority vote. And you know, we have had many elections in this state the last couple of decades where the winning candidate has not had a majority vote. It's been some source of controversy. You know, if you can use it to criticize the person who does win, saying, well, you were never elected by a majority, and attempt to undermine their credibility from that standpoint. So there are other approaches that other states have used, and one of those is a runoff of the top two. That, of course, increases costs. We don't have that, but I think that is going to be an issue that percolates.
Yeah, I find that, yeah, it's an interesting question again, and I haven't had much time to really think it through thoroughly, but my instinct here is to say, well, no, then you don't know what person stands on what issues. Because if you just get the two top ones, and the two top ones happen to be Democrats, or the two top happen to be Republicans, you really don't know. You're just voting for a person, and you're not necessarily voting for an ideal, a platform, value statement. And I think, you know, it's like football. Pick a team. Pick a team. And I think that's part of the dysfunction in this country. We have one team as a Democrat as president. We have Congress run by the Republicans. And the opposite has been true when George Bush was president. Democrats ran. And it's like we don't expect that when we play football or baseball that we get to pick somebody from each of the teams and decides, oh, that's great. We pick a team. And I'm one that just says, pick a team, people. What are your values? What are your principles? What's the best team you want to play on? Go. Vote for those folks.
I'd be all in favor of a sudden death overtime.
Well, my husband picks his own team with the fantasy league, so I don't know what to do with that. One last question here. If you could take 30 seconds, maybe one person from each party. What is done to influence those unpledged delegates? You know, what's done? When does it start? What forms does it take?
We'll defer. We don't have any.
You know, I don't think there is any. I mean, I have not, and I've talked to all of you know, all of our unpledged delegates. I don't think they've been contacted, other than they've been invited. They were invited when Senator Sanders was here, and they were invited when former President Clinton was here. They were invited, but I don't think that there has been that kind of get the call in the afternoon and chit-chat. I don't think any of our unpledged delegates have received any call from anybody.
And the Republicans are saying they don't have an answer because they don't have any. So we are going to need to draw this conversation and this forum to a close. No doubt when the forum ends tonight, we know the discussion and the interest and maybe even some of the confusion will continue, but a lot less confusion for all of us thanks to our guests tonight. The questions that we were asked, in addition to any that we received and were unable to ask, will be compiled in a list. We'll make sure to share those with everyone who's sitting here at the table, just so they can see the kinds of questions that people had. The League will also compile those, and they will post those on their website. I want to give a big thank you to MCAT for the grant that allowed this forum to be live streamed, and to Ron Shaw for recording and editing it. The program will air on Missoula Community Access Television's Channel 189 on May 30th from 9 to 11 p.m. and again on June 4th from 7 to 9 p.m. And on May 30th, you will be able to find a link for online access to this recording of the webcast on the League of Women Voters website. They might have it up there, lvwmissoula.org. And finally, I would like to thank a number of other people. I'm going to start with our experts and panelists for sharing their expertise and time. Thank you very much. I think we need to give you a round of applause for that. I also want to thank the League of Women Voters for supporting this kind of nonpartisan discussion forum, and to the students in the Political Science Honors Society at the University of Montana, the Pi Sigma Alpha. And finally, thanks to you, the public, for being involved, for being part of this civic discussion. It's an important one. As we know, it determines our common future. And with that, I wish you all a grand evening and good night.